Just a few days, one of the most popular social media applications, TikTok, could be banned across the country. However, that ban could be delayed under the proposal of Senator Ed Markey.
Western Mass News reporter Addie Patterson joins us live in studio with those details. Addie?
That's right, Chris and Abby. Just days before TikTok is set to be banned nationwide, Senator Ed Markey has introduced a bill that would extend that January 19th deadline by almost 9 months. It's called the Extend the TikTok Deadline Act. If passed, the legislation would delay the deadline by which parent company ByteDance must sell TikTok or face a ban by 270 days in order to allow current negotiations from other companies interested in purchasing the app to continue. Senator Ed Markey discussing his proposed legislation earlier. He says the potential TikTok ban lacks evidence and directly conflicts with the First Amendment, undermining the rights of over 170 million Americans who use the platform.
The intelligence community produced absolutely no evidence that the Chinese government is compromising this information. It provided no information whatsoever. What we have right now is something completely different. TikTok is an integral part of the economy. People don't understand that. There's 220,000 jobs in our country that are related to TikTok right now. 7 million businesses use it. Let's let that continue. Let's give them the time right now while the negotiations continue.
And while the senator does acknowledge the issues TikTok has, including the risk posed to the privacy and mental health of young people across the nation, Markey says he'll continue to hold the app accountable for such behavior. As of right now, if no intervention takes place, the video app will be banned in the United States starting this Sunday. For now, reporting live in studio, Addie Patterson for Western Mass News.
Thank you, Addie. In less than an hour, Governor Maura Healey will deliver her second State of the Commonwealth address at 7 p.m. This will occur at the House chambers inside the Massachusetts State House. And if you'd like to watch, you can tune in to the live stream on the Western Mass News app.
Still ahead here on Western Mass News, an exclusive sit down with a man who says without wearing his Apple Watch, he might not currently be alive. We'll explain with his full story next.
Plus, some history was made last night as UMass basketball took down Fordham in a 120-118 thriller. We'll tell you how when we return.
And it looks like we've got one shot at accumulating snow before an Arctic blast arrives for early next week. We'll take a look at the latest forecasts next.
And Western Mass News wants to know, what is your bright spot? Share your photos with us. What brightens your day or week? The photos might just make our Saturday morning newscast. Bright Spot brought to you by Gary Rome Hyundai.
And we're going to